There's something in the sock bucket. Hello? What are you doing in there? What are you doing? You're so funny. Hi. Little strokes. Oh, you're so baby. Who's a little baby? Oh. He's a pups. What you doing? You doing that, huh? Are you a sock? Yeah. Hi. He's so funny. Hello. We're not going to talk about when in the month we are in. Let's just say we are closer to February than we are to December. And I will call myself out, okay? I will. It's the 27th of January. It's Tuesday. No, I did not say hello to you all. So, hello, and it will soon be goodbye. I have not really vlogged much this month. I did show a little bit of me reading a couple of times, I think. I have mostly been reading one book, and then I have been listening to audiobooks, but I can't really show those because they're on my phone, which I film on, so I can't really show you those that much. So yeah. So I apologise for how very little content I am going to be giving you specifically in my vlog. So I have been doing a few different things, reading wise. I've been mainly reading this book, The Historian by Elizabeth Kostova. This is like a Dracula sequel, sort of, so it's set, well, okay, it's complicated. It's kind of set in minimum of 2 different timelines. I'm going to say timelines. I don't mean timelines. I just mean in times. So it's not really the main timeline, but it's the present day, and quote present day, because the present day is the 1970s. So not present day for, me and you, but in terms of what day or date we are currently watching this in. But yeah, and it's based on then, and it's based on this girl, teenager sort of woman, and I don't think she has a name. I think she's an unnamed character, although it is set in the first person, So I am wondering if it's kind of set to sound like the author, Elizabeth Kostover. I don't know. Like if it's, and I'm assuming a fictionalized version of her, which will have some truth in it, I'm sure. But it's also got a 1950s-ish timeline that is in her dad's point of view, and that is mainly written in letters that she's reading. And that, I would say that's the main timeline, if I'm honest. But there are little bits also in letters from this professor who her dad knew and was sort of, I think the professor was his advisor in college / university. And it's following him as well. And so we've kind of stopped with that timeline. So that timeline with the professor was around the 1930s, and you read a little bit of that, and most of that is near the start of the book, and then for the rest of it, it's mainly her dad in the 1950s, and then a little bit of her in the 70s. And it's all about the history of Vlad the Impaler, also most commonly known as Dracula. He's the more historical person that the fictional Dracula in Dracula by Bram Stoker is based on. And it's kind of in the theory that possibly Vlad Dracula the Impaler, or Vlad the Impaler Dracula, I don't know, Vlad Tepes, if I'm saying that last name correct, it's kind of based on the theory that he might actually still be alive as a vampire, and it's going through the historical stuff about all of the different European sort of vampire myths and folklore, and it's basically her dad hunting Dracula, but kind of because he's looking for his professor. So in the 50s, his professor, who we see the point of view of from the 30s, disappears after a book that her dad shows this professor, and it turns out this book the professor also had, and I think this professor's disappearance is connected to the book and to that whole mystery around, well, vampires, really. And there's a lot of commentary on things like communism, stuff like that, especially in Europe in the 1950s, and around then, like 40s, 50s, after the Second World War. And yeah, it's really interesting. I'm buddy reading it with Anne from In Search of Wonder. It's a great book for Epistolary January, because there's a lot of letters in it. And it's a very good book. Yeah, it's like over 700 pages, at least in my Kindle version. But it won't be far off, even in the physical, I'm sure. But it's really good. It does ebb and flow, but like there's some like quieter moments, and then there's some more exciting moments. None of it so far has been graphic or exciting in that very obvious way. It's kind of in the exciting way of like, kind of like the original Dracula book by Bram Stoker, in the sort of classics way, where it's not necessarily high adventure, like when you say, I don't know, reading a Harry Potter book and you're at the exciting part, or the Hunger Games, or any of that sort of modern sort of writing. But it's really good. Even in the slower parts, it's still been really interesting. So obviously, if you're not interested in that sort of thing, because a lot of it is very much research based and looking and finding things in that way, but those parts are quite often the slower parts, I would assume, for most people. So if you're not interested in that, you probably wouldn't like it, especially for how long this book is. But I've really enjoyed it. I love that stuff. I find it really fascinating, especially with stuff like this, where it's kind of like, what I would say alternative history. I don't know if that's the right phrasing, but it's like the whole myths and legends, and, you know, whether they're real or not, you know, especially in particular the whole vampire stuff in this particular book. So it's really interesting, and it's an interesting non-religious sort of viewpoint on it. And I mean non-religious by the author. I don't actually know if the author is non-religious or has some other religion, I don't know. But the book is very much showing the viewpoint of, as long as it's a true faith in your own God, then that faith can fight against the darkness of Dracula. So if any of you have read Bram Stoker's Dracula, and I mean specifically reading it, it's a very surprisingly Christian book, especially for a book about vampires, and has a lot of Christian themes, and a lot of the weapons used, well, not a lot, but certainly one of the protections that the characters used in Bram Stoker's Dracula is a silver necklace of a cross, which obviously is a Christian symbol. And so basically, this book, this story, kind of carries that through with that Christian faith for that, but also the Muslim faith for that, their own version of it. I can't remember what they used. They might have said what they used, but I can't remember. So it's a very interesting viewpoint. It's not one that I necessarily agree with, but I can see a lot of either more liberal, maybe Christians, and certainly non-religious people who have the viewpoint of all religion is correct. It's just whether it's correct for you sort of viewpoint for that reason. And that is an interesting viewpoint. I don't necessarily agree with that, but it's fine. It's not taking away my enjoyment. It's not a big part of it. It's just there's little bits that show that. But it's a very interesting book, I think. Yes, there are some theories that I have had that have come true. There's definitely some chills, like goosebump moments, which has been really cool. So far, I would say it's been clean. I don't remember there being any swearing, or if there is, it's a very small amount. I don't remember hearing God's name used in vain, and if it is, again, not very much. And it's been clean in terms of content-wise. I would say it is, but there are definitely 2 or 3 moments where it kind of could have gone further, but didn't, in terms of the relationships, shall we say. So there's definitely allusions to intimacy between characters, and those characters are unmarried. But none of it is actually described. It's kind of more fade to black, but there's not really any spice. There's no actual descriptions, really. The nearest to descriptions is in the present day timeline in the 1970s, when the teenage girl is intimate with this guy that she likes. So far it was only mentioned once, as in it only happened once, and again, that towed the line more than the other ones, probably because it's a more modern sort of time, because it's the 1970s, or at least that's my viewpoint on it. But again, it's not graphic, it's not spicy, you don't see anything. You basically see the beginnings of it, and then, like I said, it's a fade to black. So, and it was very, very brief. The only thing that I would say is that I would recommend you don't listen to this as an audiobook, or at least not without some sort of physical, like an ebook or physical book, because of the letters and switching times, there is no proper indication for the change in the years. So some of them there is, so like if you read in the start of a letter, then obviously that's going to be more obvious. But that hasn't always happened, so it could get very confusing. There are times where you are, the majority of the time, in the 1950s timeline in the letters, but then it switches over to the present day in the 70s, and it takes me a minute to remember where we are in the 70s timeline and what's going on. So there is that, and obviously if I was reading physically, like a physical book instead of an ebook, I might be able to just switch it to jog my memory. And to be fair, I didn't need to do that. My memory was jogged pretty quickly. But some of you might find that difficult to deal with, especially on audio, but even if you're reading it physically or through an ebook. So I would warn you about that. I have been okay with it, but there have been times where I'm like, who is this again? Or wait, what were we reading the last time we were in this person's perspective? So just be aware of that. But thankfully I have not been bored. I've not felt bogged down by it, which is quite impressive because I'm a slow reader, and so if it's a long book, depending on what's going on, I could end up feeling quite bogged down because I'm like, are we not done yet? I've got other books I need to read. And now obviously I don't really feel that way about books, really. Like, I know I don't have the feeling where I need to read a certain amount of books. There are books I want to prioritise because of things like my yearly challenges and stuff like that. But I'm not the sort of person who gets really bogged down by those thoughts and challenges, I guess. But sometimes if it's a long book, I could feel like that anyway, or a boring book. Like, for example, last year in 2025, I was reading the Robin Hood book by Henry Gilbert. And that's technically a short book, or like an average book, like 300-ish pages. But because the writing is a slower pace, and the chapters were so long, it was ridiculous. I felt bogged down and stressed because I just felt like it was a never-ending book. And I don't feel that way about The Historian. Some of the chapters, it's hard to know, because I'm reading out Kindle, it's hard to know how many pages there actually are for each chapter, but certainly some of the chapters are longer than others. It does vary, which is cool. So if you like that, you might like that. But I haven't felt bogged down by it because it's kept my interest. So even though it's not been high action, it's still kept the interest for me. The writing's been really good, in my opinion, and kept me interested. So I'm really glad about that, especially for a long book. So yeah, I'm really enjoying it. And like I said, I've also been listening to audiobooks. I don't want to say too much about them because obviously I'll be doing my wrap up. But let me think. I've done one audiobook for Anne's Reading the Classics Challenge, and that was American Fairy Tales. I can't remember who wrote them or / collected them, but I don't know if they're all written by the same person. But they are, as the title suggests, sort of fairy tales, but based in America. And I thought that was really good, actually. I enjoyed it. I listened to it on Audible. I did decide to pay for is it 3 months for 99p or something like that? So I thought, you know what? I bought new headphones, and they came with that offer. Or at least I could do the offer, which you could do anyway. It wasn't headphone specific, so I don't know. Anyway, either way, I got that offer. And so I thought I'd try it. And I've been enjoying Audible so far. I know people have talked about the whole AI thing, and I do agree. I don't want to be listening to AI narrations. But I don't know how you can find that out. And also, I don't know if Audible is doing that, or whether it's only Audible in America and not Audible in the UK, because maybe that has a difference. I don't know. Maybe it doesn't. Either way, I've been listening to that. I listened to that. It was a very quick read. I enjoyed it. The Reading the Classics Challenge, even though it's the 1776 edition, you don't actually have to read American classics, but that is an extra sort of thing that you can do if you want to, and that is what I want to try and do if I can. So that's why I read American fairy tales, although not Native American, just general American. They're not Native American Indian fairy tales or myths or anything like that. Anyway, so I listened to that. I also listened to a dramatised version of The ABC Murders by Agatha Christie. I enjoyed that. However, I don't know if dramatised versions of books is the right way to go for me, personally. Not that I don't enjoy them, I really like them, I think it's a really cool idea. But I think with my hearing, because I'm hard of hearing, for any of you who don't know, I struggle to hear things generally, even if it was just your average audiobook style of narration. I have found that because there's background noise with the speaking or descriptions, and also some, at least with this particular audiobook with the ABC Murders, the characters weren't always speaking loud enough. In particular, the actor who voiced Hercule Poirot, the actor was Peter Dinklage, for anyone who's interested. That was the main reason why I picked it up, because I love Peter Dinklage, so I wanted to give it a try. Now, I don't necessarily mean the voice acting was bad, necessarily. It's just I struggle to hear him, especially, and other people. And so it basically meant that I don't know who the killer was. Now, I know a little bit about that in terms of who the killer was, but in terms of if someone who's read the book as well goes, so who was the murderer then? I'll be like, I couldn't tell you. I couldn't tell you their name. And even though I can tell you different bits about that character in terms of, their gender or, whether they're a big part of the book or not, stuff like that, I couldn't tell you. I have no idea. Wait, no, I knew that, But, yeah, I just really struggled with that. Now, I don't know if that's because it was new headphones and I hadn't quite got the right sort of setting for them, or whether it is just my hearing. I don't know. So what I do need to do is maybe try again, either with that same book or a different dramatised edition of a book on Audible, and see how I get on with that one. Because maybe it is just me and I was just struggling with sorting out my new headphones, or whether it is just they're not the right thing for me with my hearing. I'm not sure. But there we go. I also listened to the Thursday Murder Club. I did technically listen to that in December, but I finished it in January. So that was technically my first book. I listened to that one on Spotify, I think. Or was it Audible? I can't remember. It doesn't matter. Either way, I listened to the Thursday Murder Club by Richard Osman. Very popular series. It's only the first book. I did try it years ago, physically, and I just could not get into it. I left it. But I was able to get through it on Audible. I enjoyed it well enough. Again, that wasn't a dramatised version. That was just your typical audiobook speaking. But it was good. It wasn't that hard to figure out. But it was one of those books where there was different situations happening and different culprits for each of those situations. So it wasn't straightforward in that respect. Like, it wasn't like one murder and then one murderer sort of thing. There were different things that ended up happening throughout that time, and then they weren't always the same person who did one of the things or more. And whilst I didn't always get everyone from that, none of it was that surprising. And the actual murder did not surprise me. I do warn you, in some ways it's realistic. So it's realistic in terms of the fact that none of the characters were perfect people, which is very realistic. Not always realistic with how drastic some of the things people did. Like, I'm not sure that every person you meet has some sort of big story behind them, and stuff like that. Those of you who've read the book will know what I'm talking about. But it did kind of end with the sort of point of view, at least with the first book. I can't speak for the second, because maybe it gets picked up again and something does happen, I don't know. But the person who actually did the main murder that the main book was initially about, Okay, I'm going to do a spoiler, because I need to mention it, because especially as a Christian, my fellow Christian who's not read it and are thinking about reading it, you might not want to read this book because of what happens. So what I'm going to do is, before you kind of skip or whatever, I'm going to do this and put my hand up, And when you see me put the hand down, that means I've stopped talking about the spoiler. So if you don't want to listen to the spoiler, I'm not going to do a proper spoiler. Like, I'm not going to mention, like, any names or anything like that. I'm just going to be very vague. But it will still be a sort of spoiler as to what happens, technically. So, yeah, if you don't want to, just watch for my hand to go down and then you can come back. So, basically, the person who did the murder gets away with it. As in the main murder that you hear about. And he gets away with it, and the people who basically know about it are like, oh, well, it's okay, because he's a nice guy, and he probably just won't do another murder again. And that's the end of it. They don't, like, report him to the police, because murder is murder. Regardless of whether you go to do it again, it's still against the law. So, yeah, basically they just let him get away with it. And that is, well, I mean, questionable behaviour, regardless of whether you're a Christian, in my opinion. Like, just because you're a nice person and you wouldn't normally murder someone doesn't mean you should get away with it. There's got to be consequences for our actions, especially those sorts of actions. So yeah, if you're Christian and you really don't like that and you disagree with that, then I would say you might not want to read this book. However, I do admit that I don't know what happens in the next book or any of the future books. So it's very possible that this character does end up getting found out for his crimes and does get sent to prison. But I cannot say whether that actually does happen. Therefore, just be aware of that. Okay, so those of you who skipped, you can listen now. I apologise for that. I just thought it was quite important to talk about. So, yeah, I don't know what happens in the next books. But there we go. I'm not put off by them. I might listen to them. I personally don't want to pay for them or have them in my house physically. So it's definitely something I would probably try and get cheaply, either say libraries or Audible again, stuff like that. Because I'm not 100% sure about it. I did enjoy it. I think, what did I give it? About 4-star. So I didn't not enjoy it, but it was good. I just didn't necessarily know how to feel about the ending. But I do have to say that on the place I listened to it, and I think it was Spotify, there was some extra stuff in it where there was an interview between the author, Richard Osman, and another woman whose name I did not catch because I was listening to it. I think she's also an author, but I don't know her name or what book she has written. But that was really interesting. I really enjoyed that. It was interesting to hear Richard Osman talk about his book, really, and his thought processes behind it and stuff like that. So, yeah, that was good. I'm trying to think what else I have listened to. What else did I listen to? I know there was at least one other book that I listened to. Oh, yes. I also listened to Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. This is a historical fiction based on mainly the wife of William Shakespeare and their family. You don't really get much of William Shakespeare's point of view or what's going on in his life. It's mainly following his wife Anne and their children and a little bit of the extended family, like grandparents and stuff. As in for the children, grandparents, their parents. So that was really interesting. It's historical. I listened to it on a mixture of Spotify and Audible because I ran out of minutes on Spotify. And I was like, well, I want to read this before I watch the film. The film is already out at the cinema. Still have not watched it yet. I was going to watch it on Sunday, but it turns out I needed to do some emergency shopping. So and when I say emergency, I don't mean emergency. It's just we ran out of cat food. Nothing actual emergency. Like the cats were fine. Like there was enough food, but I needed to buy the cat food that day. And on Sunday, the shops close early, so I needed to make sure to do that. And I didn't want to have to go to the cinema and carry the cat food around, so I just left it. Anyway, basically because I wanted to watch the film pretty soon, I decided to just bite the bullet and pay for it on Audible. It's cheaper because I have a subscription, so it was £7.99, so about £8 instead of, I think, normally about 16, so it's like half price. And I enjoyed it. The audiobook itself was really good. The narrator was really good. She's actually the actress who plays Anne in the film. And yes, I really enjoyed it. It was a great read. It wasn't overly emotional, but there were emotional bits. And it's definitely more about Anne's children specifically, but you also get Anne's point of view as well. And it's basically about, you get the different timelines, so you kind of go back and forth. So you kind of start with the sort of present day when Hamlet's twin sister gets ill, and I think her name is Agnes. I could be wrong. But anyway, she gets ill and they find out it's the plague. And basically, whilst that's all happening, you get flashbacks to from the day that William meets Anne up to basically the modern day. You kind of go backwards and forwards with little bits of each one. And you kind of, it's technically chronological in that sense when you go back in time. But yeah, you kind of follow up to like their relationship, you know, when she gets pregnant, marriage, you know, their first children, you know, moving, all the rest. It's a slice of life book, basically, but historical. And it wasn't really historical or Elizabethan in how it's phrased. Like, there's no yees and thous and or anything, or any sort of Elizabethan writing or speech. So it is modern in that way, so you don't have to worry about whether you'll understand anything. But anyway, really good book. I was kind of surprised. I didn't actually, apparently I didn't really know what had actually happened. So I was quite confused, because I thought he lived longer, Hamlet, basically, than he actually did. Don't know where I got that from, but I did. So there we go. So I learned something new. And again, it was basically clean. There's no swearing, there was no spice. There was one, maybe two technically fade to black scenes, but again, kind of like with the historian, they were not really fade to black. It's more, but they kind of were. They were more like, you know, mentions or allusions to the fact that they had, you know, intimate times. And then one of them was that he started to take her clothes off, but that was it. You know, it mentions that he started to take it off, and then it literally just cuts to them talking after the act. That one I just mentioned is when they're married, but there is one where they are unmarried, so just be aware of that. But they end up getting married, so yeah. But yes, as far as I know, it was clean. It can be an emotional read, especially if you have had loss of a child, because it does go through that. So just be aware of that. You, depending on how fresh it is or just how emotional you are anyway, you might find it hard to read. I found it wasn't graphic in that way, but it does go through it, and it does go through the after effects of that grief and how each person has coped with it. I mean, you even see a little bit of that with William Shakespeare, but not very much. So it's very interesting seeing how different people might cope with grief. So you might find it very comforting, or you might find that you're not ready for that. So just see how you feel with that one. But I thought it was okay for that stuff. But obviously I've not had the experience of losing a child, so obviously if that ever ends up happening, I might change my mind on that. I don't know. But, you know, see how you personally feel. So yeah, that's all I have read. I have been trying to do Whitney's Give Me Jesus challenge, where you read more of the Bible. I been very slow with it, and then I had a very, not intense, but there was one day where I read a lot, but that is mainly because Genesis was the first book that I read. And then once I finished that, I very quickly got through a load, like 2 different books, because one of them was 1 Samuel, which I listened to. So whilst that's not necessarily a short book, I read through it quite quickly because I listened to it. And then I read 2 John, which is the second letter of John in the New Testament, which is very short. So because of that, I read quite a lot very quickly because I used them for a lot of prompts. I doubled up because you can. And I also watched a movie version of one of the books I have read. And that was the DreamWorks animation for Joseph King of Dreams. So I watched that because obviously that was in Genesis, so I've read that. I was tempted to watch Prince of Egypt again, okay? The one about Moses. I was so tempted. But I was like, no, you've already watched that. We all know you love it. Why don't you try Joseph's one? Because you know you want to try it. So I did. I did really enjoy it. I do prefer Prince of Egypt. I think the soundtrack is a lot better. Certainly in terms of the opening scene. Now, the opening scene for Joseph was beautiful, okay? It was great. But there was just that quality in Prince of Egypt. I don't know what it is. I don't know whether it's because it opened with such an emotional song in terms of the fact that the Israelites at the time were being, mistreated by the Egyptians. I don't know whether it's because of that and it's such a strong song because of that or something else. I don't know. But either way, I really enjoyed Joseph. I do disagree with a couple of things. There are a couple of things that I would say are not accurate. Obviously, it is a film version done by, I'm assuming, non-Christians, but I don't know. Or certainly maybe non-Jewish anyway, maybe. I don't know about any of that. But there were some things that I think are inaccurate in terms of one thing that I remember that's glaringly obvious. It's been a few days since I've read it, like a week or so. But one thing I do remember that was clearly just really incorrect, and that is when the two of the king's staff were imprisoned. The butler and the baker, I think. And it was when we were listening to the baker's dream. He basically said he's had the same dream for 1 week, and he says that in 3 days. The dream is the whole, in 3 days you are going to be killed. How can it be 3 days he's been killed when he's been having this 3 days for a whole week? That's incorrect. Even I know that's not correct maths. I mean, not that I'm that stupid with maths, but I'm not that great either, okay? So I thought that was very inaccurate, okay? Now, if he said that he's been having this dream for a week and he had 7 days worth of baskets, okay, sure. Whilst also incorrect in terms of what it says in the Bible, it would make more sense if that was the case. But no. He's been having 3 baskets, which was to symbolise 3 days for a whole week. Evidently, that's not 3 days, is it? So I thought that was a bit incorrect. Like, I know, obviously, because of when Joseph told him that they symbolised 3 days, it would have been 3 days after he said that. I get that. But it's still incorrect, okay? It's because he's been having that dream for a week. So how can it just didn't make sense to me. And then there was something else. I think it was to do with his wife. I was like, I don't know if that's actually his wife, but I can't remember in the Bible who it was he marries. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. Oh, the other one is more complicated. So, and it's one I've heard people mention before. And that is Joseph's reaction to his brothers coming from Canaan to get grain. So, for a few different scenes, he's basically struggling with his past hurt, basically. And whilst... Okay, so the Bible isn't unclear about it, but there's also bits where you don't really know. So, like in the Bible, he pretends to be really rough and grumpy to his brothers, partly to conceal his identity, I'm sure. But there's no mention of that being the case because he's feeling hurt and having an issue with unforgiveness. So there's no indication of that, but also it's kind of hard to know with being the written word as well. But in the film, he is very much struggling with that. He's very much angry and stuff like that. And I just didn't know how to feel about it because I thought it was very accurate to how we all are when it comes to things like this. We all do struggle with anger and hurt and unforgiveness, or even thinking we've forgiven and then something happens, or maybe we meet this person or these people again, like in Joseph's case, and realise that you do still have that anger and that hurt in your heart. So I did like that in terms of I thought it was very realistic, because, I think I would struggle with forgiveness if I had my older siblings, not only throw me into a pit, but then sell me off to a load of Ishmaelites. Like, I would struggle with that. I know I would, especially because then, not only do I get blessed for a while, I get put in prison because, the wife of my master accuses me of trying to have sex with her when actually it was the other way around, and stuff like that. So there's, and then he could easily have blamed his brothers because if they hadn't sold him off, that wouldn't have happened, and stuff like that. So I thought it was very realistic in that way, but not necessarily accurate to Joseph's story in the Bible. So yeah, I have mixed feelings. I mean, it's kind of like with the first film that I watched last year, The Prince of Egypt. It's not going to be 100% accurate. But I thought it was but like with the other one, I thought it was a pretty good interpretation of it. And I did enjoy it. So yeah. And also, it just makes me realise just how long kids' films are these days. Because that film was like an hour and a half and it went by like that. It was so quick. Like, you don't get kids' films like that anymore. Like, kids' films these days are like an extra half hour now. They're like 2 hours long. And like, I don't know what kids they think are watching, but not all kids are able to sit down for 2 hours non-stop in a cinema. Anyway, that's a completely different issue. Anyway, that's my update. It's a very long update. And it'll probably be the majority of my vlog because I've not done any filming. But I wanted to just quickly update. Well, I say quickly. It currently says 40 minutes since I've started talking to you. It's like a whole sit-down video. Anyway, so yeah, I've been doing that. I've just filmed my TBR. I say just. It was like over half an hour ago. But I just did my TBR for February. And so, yeah, you'll be seeing that before you see this. So, yeah. I guess I'll leave you to it because I don't want to keep chatting. It's already been the same amount of time as it is for my normal sit-down videos. I also need to get myself some water. I did have a cup of green tea to have some water in, but I should get some proper water as well. So I'll probably do that from all my talking. So yeah, I don't really have much to tell you. I've not really done anything exciting in January. It's just been quite normal / recovering from Christmas and being ill. I'm loads better now. I mean, I was better at the beginning of the month, pretty much. But yes, I don't really have anything else to tell you. Yeah, I'll leave you all to it. I'll try and do a little bit more showing you what I'm reading, except it's going to be difficult because I'm still just reading The Historian. I'm not reading any other books. I am currently listening to The Odyssey by Homer, which was translated by Alexander Pope. I can't remember who the narrator is though, but I'll try and remember to do that in my wrap up. But yes, I've been listening to that. That's been interesting. Again, I'm listening to that because I want to watch the film. So that will be that. I might do a video on that. Like all the books I want to read because of the films that are coming out. Because there's a few. Have a couple already happened? Yes. Yes, they have. But I'm still going to do it. Right. Bye.